Imagine walking into a desert cave after 7 years of silence. The air is dry, lifeless, and clings to your lungs like dust-laced parchment. Your flashlight beam cuts through the darkness, glinting off limestone walls scarred by time. The sand crunches beneath your boots, each step echoing in an emptiness that feels ancient. And then your light stops. There, slumped upon a carved stone seat, half swallowed by shifting dunes, is the figure of a man. His body is upright, arms resting on the armrests, head tilted back as though gazing at something long gone. His skin is stretched parchment, sun-bleached, leathered by years of arid wind. He is not merely a corpse. He is a relic mummified by the desert itself. The rescuers recoil, but no one speaks. Because this isn't simply a body found in the desert. It is the body, the man they once searched for in vain, whose story had become rumor and myth whispered. In local cafes, whose family clung to fading hope across an ocean, his name was Daniel Whitmore, and his last known footsteps had vanished into the Egyptian desert more than 7 years ago. Daniel was 34 years old when he disappeared. A tourist from Manchester, England, he had been traveling across Egypt on what he called his last great escape. Friends back home described him as restless, a man who couldn't sit still for long, always chasing the next horizon, always planning the next adventure. But there was also something quieter beneath his wanderlust. A failed marriage left him drifting. His mother, Elaine Whitmore, would later tell investigators, Daniel wasn't running towards something, he was running away from the life he thought he'd ruined. He carried with him a worn leather-bound journal, its pages filled with restless sketches and notes about temples, marketplaces, and faces he found unforgettable. That journal, Elaine said, was his second heartbeat. He loved small symbols, a brass compass he'd bought at a flea market in Cairo, a woven bracelet given by a child vendor near Luxor, and a black and white photograph of his younger sister taken years earlier. These were not just trinkets. They were touchstones, fragments of memory he carried into the desert. On March 18, 2013, Daniel checked out of a modest guest house in Aswan. The day was clear, dry winds sweeping in from the south, temperatures reaching 38 degrees Celsius by noon. Receipts later showed he purchased 6 liters of bottled water, a packet of dates, and a coil of cheap rope from a roadside shop. The shopkeeper remembered him because Daniel had asked about a route not for tourists, but for travelers. That same morning, Daniel boarded a small minibus heading west into the emptiness of the Sahara. 2 other passengers remembered him scribbling in his journal, humming under his breath. One described him as distracted, but not unhappy. By late afternoon, the minibus stopped near a weathered stone outpost, a fading mark on maps called Bir al-Maktoub, the Well of the Written. There, Daniel stepped off. That was the last confirmed sighting of him alive. The timeline grew clearer only after investigators pieced together receipts, witness testimony, and scraps of GPS data from his rented phone. March 18, 3:45 p.m. Last seen stepping off the bus near Bir al-Maktoub. March 18, 5:20 p.m. GPS ping shows him walking westward, deeper into the desert. Battery died soon after. March 19, 10 a.m. A German couple traveling by jeep spotted a lone figure walking north, but they couldn't confirm it was Daniel. March 20th, Elaine Whitmore received her son's last text message. Hotter than I imagined. But I feel closer to something here. Like the desert hides truths we've forgotten. After that, silence. When Daniel failed to return to Cairo for his flight on March 25th, the British embassy was alerted. Egyptian authorities organized a search operation. For 6 days, Bedouin trackers scoured the dunes, tracing faint boot prints that vanished where the wind swept clean. Helicopters scanned the desert, their shadows stretching across empty plains like black wings. At one point, sniffer dogs picked up a scent near an abandoned stone well. Inside, rescuers found nothing, just dry sand and an echo that seemed endless. By the second week, the search radius extended nearly 200 square kilometers. But the desert does not yield what it does not wish to give. The sun bleached away tracks, winds erased patterns, and hope dried like water in the sand. On April 6, 2013, the official search was called off. For Elaine, the silence was unbearable. She flew to Egypt herself, walking the same streets, holding up her son's photograph to strangers who shook their heads. Reporters captured her standing at the edge of the desert one morning, holding Daniel's journal in her hands, the only item recovered from his room. Her voice broke as she whispered, "The desert took my boy, but I'll never stop asking why." Back in Manchester, vigils were held. Candles melted down to stubs on church steps. Posters with Daniel's face faded. Under rain, his friends gathered, telling stories of his restless nature, his jokes, his habit of folding paper birds when anxious. And then, the years began to swallow him. By 2014, media attention dwindled. New tragedies replaced old ones. The world moved on, but Elaine never did. She called the Egyptian embassy every month, asking for updates. She wrote letters to MPs, pleading for renewed searches. Each time the answer was the same. There was no new evidence, no leads, no trace. The desert had erased him. In 2016, his belongings were returned to his family: a backpack, 3 shirts, the compass, and his journal. The last entry was dated March 18, 2013. Stone faces watching. Feels like I'm being guided or followed, can't decide which. Those words became a wound that never closed. 7 years later, in July 2020, a team of geologists surveying shifting dunes near Bir al Maktoum stumbled upon an opening in the limestone cliffs. It was a narrow crevice, half hidden by sand, leading into a cavern. Inside, the air was bone dry. The ground was littered with stones arranged in unnatural patterns like cairns or markers. At the far end of the chamber, half shrouded in shadows, sat the figure on the throne. The rescuers froze. The throne was carved from stone, crude but deliberate. The man's head leaned back, mouth slightly open, as though caught mid-breath. He was not lying where he fell. He had been placed there. The silence inside that cave was deafening, broken only by the sound of one rescuer whispering, "He's been waiting here." And pinned to the stone seat, resting against the man's brittle chest, was a single object: a compass, its glass cracked, but the needle still quivering, as though straining toward some unseen point. The discovery reopened a wound thought closed. But it also raised a question darker than his disappearance itself. How had Daniel's mummified body ended up sitting on a throne in the desert, arranged with precision, as if staged? And who placed him there? The cave was sealed for nearly a week after the geologist's discovery. Egyptian authorities cordoned off the area, treating it like a crime scene rather than a natural wonder. The heat outside was punishing, yet inside the chamber it was still, almost reverent. The rescuers described the air as papery, filled with a faint mineral tang and the ghost of something burnt long ago. Forensic specialists entered in silence, their footsteps crunching on sand that hadn't been disturbed for years. Floodlights flooded the chamber, but the shadows clung stubbornly to the edges, as though unwilling to give up their secrets. And then there was Daniel. His body had desiccated naturally, preserved by the desert's aridity, the skin stretched, taut across bones, clothing fused with his frame. His shirt was sun-bleached but intact, his trousers hardened by sand. His hands rested on the throne's armrests in eerie symmetry. Most haunting was his face, jaw slack, eyes hollow sockets, lips pulled into something almost resembling a smirk. One forensic pathologist whispered, "This isn't the desert's doing. This was arranged." Photographs documented everything. The throne, carved from sandstone, rough-edged but unmistakably deliberate. Its back rose nearly 2 meters, crowned with crude symbols scratched deep into the surface shapes resembling eyes, triangles, and lines that bled into each other. The compass, resting against his chest, its metal corroded, but the needle faintly trembling, as if still alive with magnetism. The cairns, small stacks of stones encircled the throne. Some toppled over, others standing like silent sentinels. The rope, a coil, lay discarded at the base of the throne. Frayed and brittle with age, Daniel's body was catalogued in meticulous detail. But one feature immediately disturbed investigators. His posture wasn't one of collapse. His back was straight, his head tilted as though positioned. Even the placement of his hands suggested intent. Someone had staged him. Autopsy results painted a story both familiar and strange. Cause of death, inconclusive. No gunshot wounds, no stabbing trauma, no obvious fractures. Dehydration markers, severe. Stomach and intestines showed evidence of starvation and lack of fluid. Wrist abrasions, faint but consistent with bindings, as if rope had once cut against skin. Bone fractures. 2 ribs cracked, likely perimortem. Could have been inflicted shortly before death. The pathologist's report concluded with a chilling line. Subject did not die where he sat. Subject was placed post-mortem onto the stone seat. The question now was by whom? News of the discovery broke in August 2020. Headlines screamed across tabloids. Lost Briton found mummified on desert throne. 7-year mystery ends in desert tomb. Tourist or ritual sacrifice. For Elaine Whitmore, the phone call from Cairo was shattering. She described it later. For years I begged for answers. When they told me they'd found him, I thought I'd feel relief. But then they said, the throne. My son wasn't just lost, he was used. The story consumed the public. Documentaries speculated about ancient cults, while online forums spread theories about desert hermits and hidden sects. But behind the spectacle, the investigation pressed on, quiet, methodical, and increasingly unsettling. Investigators reopened Daniel's file, laying out every known movement. He stepped off the bus at Bur al Maktoum, walked west. Alone. His phone battery died within hours. No confirmed sightings after March 19th. But when they retraced those steps, something stood out. Just beyond the minibus stop was an unmarked trail, used rarely by Bedouin guides. That path wound past abandoned quarries, then curved north toward limestone ridges, the very ridges where the throne was eventually found. This meant Daniel had likely been walking directly toward the chamber. The question, did he stumble upon it, or was he led there? During the second sweep of the chamber, forensic teams unearthed something beneath a cairn of stones, a glass bottle. The label had long peeled away, but inside were the dried remnants of dates. Fingerprint lifting was impossible, but it was contemporary, likely placed within the last decade. Nearby, scratched faintly into the wall, were marks resembling tally lines. 37 of them. Was Daniel counting days? Or did someone else mark his suffering? Most unsettling of all, hidden beneath sand at the throne's base, investigators found fragments of fabric. Blue cotton, torn, threaded with sweat stains. DNA testing confirmed it. Belonged to Daniel. He had been there while still alive. The discovery reignited old debates. Voluntary disappearance theory. Some argued Daniel staged his own vanishing, fascinated by ancient rites. But forensic evidence, wrist abrasions, fractured ribs, suggested otherwise. Accident theory. Maybe he fell into the chamber and perished, someone later finding and arranging him. Yet no signs of accidental fall were present. Foul play theory. The strongest hypothesis. Someone encountered Daniel in the desert, detained him, and left him to die. His placement on the throne was intentional, a ritual, a message, or both. Detectives leaned heavily toward the third. But that only raised more questions. Who and why? Authorities widened the investigation, combing villages and outposts near. Bir al-Maktub. They interviewed guides, drivers, shopkeepers, anyone who might recall Daniel. One Bedouin elder spoke hesitantly, refusing to let his name be published. He claimed outsiders had long whispered about the seat of the Watcher, a hidden place where strangers sometimes vanished. When pressed, he went silent, eyes downcast. Meanwhile, British investigators dispatched from London pored over Daniel's belongings again. In his journal, buried midway through the pages, they found a sketch overlooked years earlier. It was crude but unmistakable, a chair carved from stone, flanked by cairns. Beneath it, Daniel had scrawled just 3 words, "It waits here." The sketch predated his disappearance by 2 days. Elaine was flown to Cairo to view her son's remains. She did not cry when they showed her the photographs. She simply stared at the image of Daniel seated on the throne. Later she said, "He looks like he's waiting for someone. Like he still believed I would come." His sister Anna struggled differently. She admitted to investigators that Daniel had once spoken of finding something older than time in the desert. She dismissed it as his usual romantic rambling. But now she wondered, who had planted that idea in his head? 2 months into the reopened case, a breakthrough came not in Egypt, but in England. A researcher digging through old colonial archives in London uncovered a journal written in 1892 by a British surveyor stationed in the Nile Valley. One entry stood out. Beyond Bir al-Maktub lies a hollow in the cliffs where natives dare not tread. There I found a stone chair, grotesque in form. Local whispers call it the seat of judgment. I forbade my men to approach. One claimed it cursed. Another said it was a place where the condemned were left to wither. I returned once more and found the chair occupied. The entry ended there. No explanation of who or what had been seated upon it. When investigators compared the surveyor's sketch to Daniel's, they matched almost perfectly. The throne was no accident of stone. It had been there for centuries, and someone had chosen Daniel to sit upon it. The rediscovery had evolved from tragedy into something darker, a ritualized staging that stretched back generations. But the crucial question remained unanswered: who brought Daniel there, and why him? The investigation would soon uncover traces of obsession, cruelty, and a chilling human hand guiding events. By late 2020, the investigation had shifted tone. No longer was it a story of a lone tourist who vanished in the desert. Now it was about a throne, a grotesque monument carved into stone, existing in whispers across centuries. The photographs of Daniel seated upon it haunted not just his family, but the investigators themselves. One detective admitted off record, "Every night, I see him there, not dead, waiting." The throne wasn't just a backdrop to his death. It was the stage. And somewhere, someone had played the role of executioner. Investigators reconstructed Daniel's final known movements again, this time with sharper eyes. The minibus driver recalled something previously overlooked: a man who had approached Daniel at the rest stop. Middle-aged, Arabic accent not local, wearing a white scarf wound tightly around his face despite the heat. The two exchanged words, short, low, serious. That man did not board the bus, but he lingered in the shade of a crumbling wall, watching. Witnesses described him only as the man in the scarf. Detectives pressed deeper into desert villages. They found reluctant voices, hints of something unspoken. A cafe owner remembered Daniel asking about ruins where tourists never go. Another swore he saw Daniel later that evening, walking with a guide toward the desert's edge. The guide's name, Samir Nabi, a 42-year-old freelance driver and occasional desert escort for foreign travelers. Samir was brought in for questioning. His story was slippery. He admitted meeting Daniel, but claimed he'd only warned him not to wander into the ridges. Yet his tone was off flat, mechanical, rehearsed. When asked if he knew of the throne, Samir went silent. His hands shook. The interview ended abruptly when his lawyer intervened. While Samir denied any involvement, Forensic analysis was building. A case. On Daniel's clothing, fibers were found red wool, coarse, unlike his own belongings. Egyptian labs matched the fibers to a blanket seized from Samir's truck. More damning was a boot print recovered near the cave entrance. It was faint, but consistent with the type of desert boot Samir had been wearing in 2013. Still, circumstantial evidence wasn't enough. Investigators needed motive. Who would want Daniel Whitmore, an ordinary tourist, to die in such a staged, ritualistic way? That answer began to surface in whispers of obsession. In Samir's small home outside Aswan, detectives found notebooks filled with sketches, crude drawings of the desert throne, copied again and again in obsessive loops. On one page he had written, "The seat does not choose. It waits, we must bring them to it." It was no longer a missing person case. It was a case of deliberate placement. Egyptian investigators quietly circulated the idea of a cult and underground sect that believed in the seat of judgment. Historical archives offered disturbing echoes. During the Ottoman period, desert tribes had spoken of abandoning criminals in the ridges, forced to sit in the chair until the sun judged them. Colonial records described wanderers found seated, with no signs of violence, their bodies reduced to husks. It wasn't supernatural. It was a human ritual of cruelty, survival twisted into punishment. And now, Samir seemed connected to its continuation. But if Samir was part of something larger, who else was involved? Back in Manchester, Elaine struggled with the revelations. She appeared in a BBC interview, clutching Daniel's compass. Her voice was steady, but her eyes hollow. "My son wasn't lost. He was taken. Someone made him sit there. Someone watched him die." Anna, his sister, confessed a secret she had kept. Weeks before his trip, Daniel had received mysterious emails from an anonymous sender. They spoke of hidden truths in the desert and invited him to see what the ancients left behind. Daniel had laughed them off in conversation. But now, Anna wasn't so sure. Investigators traced the email address. It was linked to a cafe's Wi-Fi in Aswan, the cafe Samir often frequented. Late 2020 brought another breakthrough. Bedouin trackers, retracing routes near the cave, discovered a shallow burial pit. Inside were the remains of a goat, bound with rope, its bones arranged in a circle. The burial was recent, within the last decade. Nearby, etched into stone, were the same crude eye symbols found carved on the throne. This wasn't random cruelty. It was ritual. When the photographs were shown to Samir during a second interrogation, he stared at them for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. He whispered in Arabic, "The desert keeps its throne, always." By early 2021, British detectives joined Egyptian authorities in a joint task force. Their theory grew darker. Daniel had been lured. He had been promised hidden ruins, secret history. Instead, he'd have been led into a chamber designed to claim him. The tally marks on the wall 37 suggested he may have survived over a month inside, marking each day. His cracked ribs hinted at force. His bindings showed captivity. Daniel had not died wandering. He had died waiting. But Daniel wasn't the only one. Archives revealed at least 3 other disappearances near Bir al Maktoub between 1995 and 2010 to 1995. A French backpacker named Luc Moreau, last seen hiking alone. Never found, 2001. 2 Egyptian students camping in the ridges. Bodies never recovered. 2008. An American journalist, Sarah Klein, reported missing after traveling south from Luxor. Case unresolved. None of these had been tied to the throne until now. The implication was horrifying. Daniel may not have been the first. He was only the first to be discovered. Investigators pressed Samir, but he refused to confess. Instead, he repeated phrases over and over. "The seat does not belong to us. We only carry them." He was chosen. The words chilled detectives. They weren't the rants of a madman, they were the echoes of ritual belief, rehearsed and repeated. Had Samir acted alone, driven by obsession? Or was he part of a network of others who kept the ritual alive, delivering victims to the throne? Number. Answers yet. Only questions. In April 2021, investigators launched a second expedition into the desert ridges. This time, they weren't searching for Daniel. They were searching for others. The team returned to the chamber, excavating deeper into the surrounding sand. What they uncovered made even hardened detectives recoil. Beneath layers of sand near the throne's base, they unearthed bones, scattered, weathered, stripped of flesh long ago. Not one set, but multiple. At least 4 individuals. Some had bindings still clinging to their wrists. One skull bore a fracture consistent with blunt trauma. Another still had a fragment of cloth, a patterned scarf, faded but intact. The cave was not Daniel's tomb. It was a vault of victims. The discovery of multiple remains transformed the case from a single tragedy into a pattern of ritualized killings. And in the center of it all stood a crude sandstone throne, a symbol of cruelty stretching back centuries. The question now was no longer if Daniel had been murdered, but why him, and by whom exactly? Because someone had revived an ancient punishment, and Daniel had been their chosen offering. April 2021. The chamber no longer echoed with silence. Now it was alive with the scrape of shovels, the shuffle of boots, and the hiss of radios. Floodlights illuminated what had been hidden for centuries. Beneath Daniel's throne, beneath cairns and layers of shifting sand, skeletal remains emerged one after another. Each discovery was catalogued, photographed, bagged. The chamber wasn't a shrine. It was a burial ground, forensic experts identified. At least 4 separate individuals. Men and women, different ages, different nationalities. DNA cross-referencing eventually confirmed 2. The missing French backpacker from 1995, and the American journalist Sarah Klein. What had once been a mystery surrounding Daniel Whitmore now stood revealed as part of a series of deliberate killings. And with that revelation, the investigation narrowed its focus to one truth. Someone had orchestrated these deaths. Someone had preserved the throne's legacy. Samir Nabi remained the prime suspect. The red fibers, the boot print, the obsessive notebooks all pointed to him. But investigators struggled to tie him to multiple disappearances. Then, during a search of his home's attic, they found a wooden chest, locked and hidden beneath blankets. Inside were keepsakes, a woman's silver bracelet, engraved with the name Sarah, a leather strap from a French rucksack, a folded newspaper clipping from 1996, detailing the disappearance of Luc Moreau. At the bottom of the chest lay Daniel's photograph, folded carefully into quarters. The evidence was damning. But what disturbed detectives most wasn't the trophies. It was a handwritten note, tucked between them. In Arabic. It read, "We do not kill, we deliver. The seat takes them." Faced with the evidence, Samir finally spoke. His voice was calm, deliberate, as though rehearsing a confession he'd always known he would one day give. He described being drawn to the throne as a boy, when his father first showed him the ridges. His father told him it was a place where wrongdoers were left for the sun to judge. But for Samir, it became something more, an obsession. The throne is older than us. It waits for those who are searching. They come to me. I only lead them where they already belong. When pressed about Daniel, he said he wanted truth. He wanted escape. I gave him the chair. The desert did the rest. Investigators realized this was the pattern. Samir preyed on wanderers, the lost, the restless. He lured them with promises of hidden ruins, then delivered them to the throne. But Daniel had not simply been abandoned. He had been kept alive long enough to suffer. The tally marks on the wall confirmed it. In September 2021, Samir was formally charged with multiple counts of murder. The trial, held in Cairo, drew international media. Elaine Whitmore and her daughter flew in to witness it. The prosecution laid out the case with chilling precision. The forensic links, the recovered belongings, the journals of obsession. They showed photographs of Daniel on the throne, then of the other remains pulled from the chamber. Jurors gasped when the tally marks were projected on screen. 37 lines. 37 days. Elaine wept silently, clutching Daniel's compass. In her hand, Samir sat expressionless throughout, his only words delivered in a monotone. I am not guilty. The seat is guilty, I only serve. But the evidence was undeniable. On November 14, 2021, the court delivered its verdict. Guilty on all charges, Samir was sentenced to life, imprisonment without possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted in flashes from cameras, the air heavy with whispered prayers and curses. Elaine closed her eyes, but there was no relief in her face. Later she told reporters, "Justice doesn't bring Daniel back. It doesn't erase what he endured. My son sat on that throne for 37 days, waiting for me. That truth will never stop haunting me." Following the trial, the Egyptian government sealed the chamber permanently. The entrance was collapsed under controlled detonations, burying the throne beneath tons of rock. Officials declared it unsafe, but some suspected it was to erase its power, to strip the site of its allure for future obsessives. Forensic teams returned the recovered remains to their families where possible. In France, Luc Moreau's sister buried him beside their parents. In the U.S., Sarah Klein's remains were interred in a private ceremony, her family refusing all media attention. Daniel's mummified body, after lengthy diplomatic negotiations, was flown back to Manchester. His funeral was quiet, intimate, the coffin closed. On the coffin rested only his compass. The compass became the haunting symbol of the case. Investigators noted how it had been placed against Daniel's chest, almost like an offering. For Elaine, it became her last tether to her son. She told a documentary crew, "He always carried it, but it never pointed north. Daniel used to joke that it was broken. I think maybe he knew it wasn't broken. It was pointing him to where he would end." Looking back, investigators saw the case not as random cruelty, but as obsession masquerading as ritual. Samir had twisted fragments of oral history into a justification for murder. The throne itself was never magical, never cursed. It was simply stone. But in human hands, stone can become an altar. Detective Karim Hassam summarized it best. The danger was never the desert. It was the man who chose to use it. Today, the ridges of Bir al Maktoum are silent again. Sand drifts endlessly, covering the scars left by investigators, swallowing tracks until even memory feels erased. The throne lies buried beneath rock, unseen, untouched. But for those who know the story, the image lingers. A man seated upright, lips cracked, eyes hollow, waiting for rescue that never came. In the end, Daniel Whitmore's tragedy wasn't that he lost his way. It was that he trusted the wrong guide. His story remains a reminder that cruelty doesn't need myths or curses to survive. All it takes is obsession, ritualized in the mind of a man who believed the desert demanded sacrifice. And somewhere in the silence of the Sahara, beneath the endless dunes, the seat still waits, not because it is alive, but because humans keep giving it victims.